Okay, cool. So this is called learning before the point, like learning something while it's pointless to learn it. Okay, or seemingly pointless. Okay, so my premise is for this talk that often Apple gives us APIs when there doesn't really seem to be a point to them. Or maybe it's just for like some niche application, but we're doing some kind of mainstream kind of maybe consumer or business app, and it's just like, oh, well, it's nice for maybe some game or I don't know, some people over there, but not really relevant to me. So I guess there's no point to it. And I think this falls under kind of two main types of scenarios. The first one is the June-September scenario. So in June at WWDC, they're like, here's this API, and we're like, whatever. In September, a new iPhone model comes out with some new hardware characteristics, and then we're like, oh, that's what that's for. Okay, there's a point to it now. Cool. I guess I'll add support for it in October or November because I have to learn it now because I was ignoring it because it was pointless. Another variation, another scenario is V1 of the API comes out. And we're like, okay, sure. I mean, you could make like a toy demo or something, I guess, with that. V2 comes out and you're like, I can actually imagine some real applications for this. V3 comes out and you're like, holy shit, this is going to change the world. I guess I'm going to dig into this now that it's like 3 years old and will take months to learn, and I'm behind the 8 ball. So the problem is, and I have no idea what this curve looks like. I don't have any numbers or something, but like as the API gets useful, it's more complex to learn. So where on this curve do we like engage with the API and start learning it before it's objectively to us useful? So let's look at some examples. And by some, I mean a lot. And by a lot, I mean totally blowing my 10-minute budget by... So auto layout. Okay, so when was this introduced? 2011 on OS X. I wasn't an OS X developer, so totally didn't know that happened, only through researching this thing. 2012, iOS 6. So again, we got a little scenario of the June-September. It comes out in iOS 6, and at that point, every phone had been a 3.5-inch thing. So why would I need to change my layout at all? Or why would I just change to some new way of doing that? Obviously, I'm going to ignore that. Oh, crap, phones come out that are taller. Maybe I can just update a few little calculations and continue to ignore this API and just keep getting by. But when did it become absolutely necessary? Was it iOS 7 when things started laying out fairly differently from iOS 6? We had to kind of straddle the two releases. Maybe that was a point for a lot of us when it became iPhone 6, 6 Plus. We go from 3.5 and 4-inch to suddenly having now 4 different things. Maybe that's the breaking point where we're like, oh God, now do or die, we got to do this. Or maybe this, at some point, they were saying, you should make storyboards work for both iPad and iPhone and not just have this totally different storyboard for each. And they introduced this compact regular. And that becomes a way that enables us to make these universal storyboards. But maybe it's another case of this thing we can just ignore and be like, I don't know, I'm just going to not pay attention to that weird thing. Until the very next year, we have iPod multitasking. So slide over split view, where having a storyboard for an iPad that assumes you have this huge layout is totally broken concept. And now we need a universal storyboard or programmatically constructed view, whatever you do, that can then go down to this iPhone-ish size and up to this iPad half-ish, third-ish, two-third-ish size. So where do we engage in auto layout? When we're like way past the point or somewhere earlier on there? Okay, this is the prelude to Swift. So Swift was in development for 4 years internally at Apple before it was released publicly. And so they knew what they were building to, they knew the characteristics of the language, and they knew what they had to augment the runtime, the Objective-C runtime to support. So they put all these features into the runtime, and we got Objective-C modern syntax. And if you look at the difference between Objective-C before all this and after it is very close to Swift, actually, to the point when I was kind of bouncing back and forth between projects, I wouldn't even consciously know which language I was reading. I just knew what the code was doing, but I had to actually kind of stop and be like, oh, what is this? But the stuff that's pre all of this, yeah, it's like alien script compared to Swift. Okay, health and fitness. Cool. So iOS 8, we get Health Kit, HK Workout, we get Core Motion, CM Pedometer. So we've got this models that can just give us this pretty good idea of what the user's doing physically, moving around. And at that point, we had the phone. So if you had a iPhone 5S, then you had the first motion chip where it was like energy-wise reasonable to get all this core motion information to see what the user's doing on a continuous basis. And so you're like, okay, I don't know, do I bother? Do I care about fitness with a phone in my pocket? I don't know, is that niche? And then September rolls around and there's the Apple Watch. And suddenly these APIs have their like truer home. Okay, here's a small one. Could have cut it to meet my time budget, but I didn't. Vector assets, right, okay. So for quite a while, we had vector assets in your image asset catalog, and that would just compile down to PNGs right at compile time. And then the PDF was just thrown away, essentially. And then iOS 11, Xcode 9, we get preserve vector data. So we're gonna keep the PDF and we're gonna have it in the app as it's running on device so that we can scale some things up. And there's an accessibility feature that makes use of that. Okay, cool. What else was released around iOS 11 timeframe? iPhone X. So yeah, another screen size change happened. So, and at 3, so kind of another reason for vector data. So the next year, Watch Kit, it gets vector images. Now we've had 2 sizes of watches for years on end, and suddenly they add the same concept of safe area and margins. So what can we infer from that in June 2018 that we don't need to wait till September 2018? We can infer there's probably going to be a larger Apple Watch screen that's going to come out. Also, it's probably not going to be square. Otherwise, why do we have a safe area? Why are margins changing? Sure enough, Apple Watch Series 4. Rounded corners, larger screen. Okay, camera depth. Here's another interesting one. iPhone 7 Plus comes out. It's got dual rear cameras that can do the bokeh effect. Cool. So there's some depth info in there, but it's probably just going to a JPEG. So it's probably kind of lossily doing that conversion. Okay. Next year, we get these new photo and video formats, which allow us to do lossless depth. So we can just keep both channels of the video and we can do calculations on it. And then you can, eventually there's APIs to change your depth setting losslessly. So, but there was this, in iOS 11, there was AV depth data, enum, accuracy enum. And there was the relative case, and that made sense. The iPhone 7 Plus uses it's 2 cameras, and 2 cameras use what's called a disparity system. And a disparity system is your eye. It's like your eyes. There's an offset of where the photons come in for the same source, and so it uses a relative positioning, like a normalized number 0 to 1, to say, okay, all the depth I have access to, here's relatively from one end to the other end, here's the differences in depth. But then there was this like absolute case, but there's no hardware that measures depth in like an absolute term. Not in June 2017. September 2017, iPhone X, Front-facing true depth camera can measure in an absolute sense in meters the depth info. Suddenly this case has a point to it. NS user activity. Okay. Please raise your hands if you've ever used NS user activity. Okay. Okay, I was expecting almost nobody, so totally ruins this whole talk. Right, so, okay, iOS 8 comes out, continuity is possible, which I didn't use for years later. Actually, in iOS 12 timeframe, I started using continuity. Spotlight, indexing and searching a year later, and then they have to kind of add APIs to say, that was for continuity. It's not for Spotlight indexing. Siri suggestions and shortcuts, iOS 12. And then now, just randomly, for the new Scenes APIs, now it's the new state restoration, right? So there's no like surprise one in this one. There's no like, sorry, second, like, oh, there's a new iPhone that does something special. No, it's just that this is just this continuous gradient where it just got more and more useful and covered more and more cases, and it became more and more fundamental, right? Maybe we didn't care about it at first, but I don't know. Maybe this is a reason to learn about when there's no point. Okay, this is a totally chock full slide. So, you know, I hear some games people, they get to do 2D stuff, 3D stuff. I'm doing a business app, so I don't know. Maybe that's not really relevant to me. 2D stuff comes out. Sprite Kit, I didn't use it when it first came out. I did some UI Kit dynamics. It was one of my portfolio pieces. It was like, I made all these really serious apps, and then I had some stuff just bouncing around the screen, and that was the thing people cared about. It was like the least code. It was the dumbest demo, but somehow people thought it was the most special one. Okay, cool. Got into a little bit of graphics there, but not really a lot. Scene Kit comes out, 3D. Metal comes out. When do we start engaging? When do we start learning 3D? ARKit comes out. Okay, iOS 11, ARKit 1. I worked on a like what we call a bench project or a labs project on this. Okay, so it's got this tracking, world tracking. It only had horizontal planes. I don't know about you, but I don't engage with stuff on the floor too much when I'm doing like stuff with my phone. So that seemed kind of pointless, actually, for the use cases we had. We wanted content people would be reading or seeing, interacting with, photos, whatever. None of that was there. Then face tracking came out in September with the iPhone X. So suddenly it was like, oh, wow, we can have face meshes and whatever. So I was glad I was on a research project while it was still in beta. Half a year later, which shows how much they were actually iterating on this. This was like 11.3. They didn't wait like a whole year to rev it. They added vertical planes, and there was this little arms race with Android. So they had their AR core, and they came out with their vertical plane support. So it was like, it was on. Okay, semi-useful. Image tracking was huge though when it came out. Two things happened. They upped their resolution of their camera. So before it was 720p. So when we were prototyping this, it was like, I'm trying to do OCR on content that I'm detecting in the AR environment so I can put anchors to it and put 3D content on it. And I can't OCR it out past like a couple meters because the camera's at freaking 720p. But, you know, anyways, they added it to 1080p. But it was like, how do you know those things? How do you know you can or can't use this API like in real world actual, like the user has the phone in their hand. You got to like get your hands a little dirty, right? And then now ARKit 3 has like so many things that's so useful, like can do so many, you know, like face tracking. Now we've got multiple face tracking, right? So who knows? We could have engagements of watching people interacting together. It can do body tracking. There's like skeletal kind of like estimation of like where my arms are and my hand and my wrist and whatever. So I can augment my face or just my whole body. And because it knows what my body is, it detects it's a body and it has depth, then now we can have people occlusion. So now I can have 3D content and it can know that I'm coming in front of it and like know to occlude that content. And some previous year they had we could get the video from both back cameras, but now we can have it from front and back. So now it's at this huge point, but do I start learning 3D now and transforms and like coordinate spaces, screen coordinate spaces, camera, world, whatever? Like it's probably a little overwhelming to just kind of get in now, but maybe like 2 years ago was like a good point. And then there's Reality Kit, and OpenGL is deprecated. So maybe I had this app and I've been using OpenGL for years, and Metal, is it Metal 3 now? I don't know, like now it's Metal and it's not OpenGL, and there's tons of libraries that are built on OpenGL, and people just didn't care about Metal until now it's deprecated. And so yeah, I guess that's saying like, just because something works doesn't mean we rest on our laurels and stick with it. Maybe we got to just keep looking to the future. So what's next? I don't know. There's all this stuff in WWDC about indoor maps. So maybe there'll be some more indoor mapping applications that'll become more useful. Maybe AR and maps are gonna like converge, like Google's doing with their AR like instructions while we're like in the map. The ARKit 3 position tracking is like something for VR. So it's like, let's dumb the cameras down because we're not going to do AR, but let's still know our world tracking. So who knows? Maybe support for like third-party VR goggles could come out. Who knows? And then all the rumors around the AR goggles 2022, whatever. Who knows the time frames for Apple? So yeah, it's probably time to kind of get into all that stuff before it's like, you know, out, and then we're behind the 8 ball. So cool, thanks. This is my talk, Learning Before the Point. Any questions?
What's your takeaway for the talk? I assume is never ignore anything that is coming out and just immediately launch into it.
So every year we have like phases that we do. So June comes out and we cover all the what's new in whatever talks WWDC. And then I like to dig into a couple talks past that. And we have a way we here at Connected, we kind of distribute who covers what talks where and how many people go to WWDC, so that we can say like, what are projected breaking changes that have to be definitely addressed before September? And what are like features, you know, there's like something like Swift UI that you might have to wait years before you use in some cases, but there's some things you could like conditionally start using like immediately. So just digging in enough to know those breaking things and things you can take advantage, but still like not neglecting the things that are a couple years out, to just have like a basic knowledge of them, a little bit of prototyping, at least someone on the team. It's not like everybody has to dig in, but we just gotta know like where things are going, right? So if every once in a while people write apps and then they might rewrite their app, it's like, if you are gonna RXify your thing, are you gonna RXify that? Sorry, like, does everybody know what RXifying? Reactive programming. If you're gonna rewrite your app and change your architecture, and like maybe you wanna know how useful some of these things that have come out, like Combine or whatever, is to know like, do we do this now, or do we just let this one shift for 2 years or not, or do it in a bit of an app or in an admin app that we can control the OS version, but not the user-facing app? Or yeah, I think you have to dig in to a certain degree, if that makes sense. But there's a triage of criticality. Yeah.
How would you go about explaining or educating someone in more of a product owner role about this cadence that I think a lot of people who follow Apple closely kind of have internalized, especially in the cases of, for example, the OpenGL deprecation, where until it's actually deprecated, you might have a hard sell to convince the work to shift your app or whatever is using OpenGL over to Metal, until it's, oh God, we actually have to do this or we're screwed. Like, do you have any thoughts about that, or about how you would apply these learnings to get work prioritized, I guess, from a business perspective?
Yeah, so it's like, so we have to be aware of these things as soon as possible to then be able to say, what's the lead time, right? Is this the two-week little fix? Like permissions dialogues for Bluetooth, they're suddenly saying, oh, like you need like location permission for your Bluetooth thing. Like you gotta know that and try it and be in the betas, and especially over betas a little bit over time, like and be able to estimate the lead time. And it's funny when you think about, okay, so I could code this in a little bit of time, but maybe my designers, they need to think, because they're going to change different flows, or they're, the designers might need like 2 weeks time, and everybody already has their backlogs, and we want to inject something in their backlog. So if I don't, like, how realistic is that in an agile environment to, like, I can't change the active sprints. So I might, depending how many teams are involved. Yeah. Yes, we really got to start with that estimate. And so we probably need to do a little bit of prototyping. Something about deprecation I don't totally worry about, because Apple's pretty good at letting things sit for a while. But if I was like, I know that, for example, Flutter is based on a graphical library that relies on OpenGL, and that library's been switching to Metal, but it's not quite there yet. So for someone like me who's a little bit not trusting third-party libraries so much, I myself would like hold off like a Flutter until they're fully Metal or whatever. So it's more like a new thing I'd not get myself into, versus worrying about things we're using right now in a total rush. But yeah. Cool. Thanks.